It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Joshua Jacobson. He is one of the leading authorities on Jewish choral and liturgical music and has written extensively on the music of Solomon Rossi, the primary subject of Te Deum's upcoming concert, Forbidden Music, on February 21 and 22. Dr. Jacobson served for 45 years as professor of music and director of choral activities of Northeastern University, where he also held the Bernard Stotsky Professorship in Jewish Cultural Studies. He is the founder and longtime director of the Zamir Chorale of Boston, an ensemble internationally recognized for its work in Hebrew music. He's conducted major ensembles, including the Boston Pops, and has lectured at institutions such as Harvard, Yale, and Brandeis. His scholarship and writing on Jewish music and cantillation have shaped the field, and his book, Chanting the Hebrew Bible, was a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award. Across a long and distinguished career, he has received numerous national honors for scholarship, leadership, and service to choral music. It is easy to say that no one has contributed more to the choral fields in regards to Jewish music and performance practice. And I feel so fortunate to sit down and have a conversation with him today. Dr. Jacobson, welcome.
Thank you so much. And what a beautiful introduction. I get tired just listening to it and thinking of all the things that I'm doing.
I felt guilty. Your career is so distinguished, and you have done so many things. I thought, how do I reduce it down to just a few kernels? Because it's quite a lot longer than what I just shared. But
It's
again, thank you so
wonderful.
much.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, to have you here with us to bring some context, some background insights into this important and rarely heard composer of the Renaissance, Solomon Rossi, is a great pleasure and is really meaningful to me to be able to get some deeper insights from you and to share those with our audiences. I thought maybe it would be a great place to start, even before we get into the music, is just to give some context to the 16th, 17th century Italy and what it was like for the Jews living in Italy, that experience for them, and then how Solomon Rossi managed to sort of live in two different worlds, living as a Jew and working in the Catholic courts.
Yes, Rossi was definitely bicultural. But let's be careful when we're talking about Italy. There's no such country as Italy, of course, at that time. And we're talking about Rossi did most of his work in Mantua, but also in Venice. Keep in mind that the first ghetto was established in the early 16th century in Venice. The word ghetto comes from the Italian or even the Venetian word for foundry, because this was a neighborhood that was established for the Jews on the site of an old foundry in one of the islands of Venice. So this was enforced. Jews were not allowed to live in the same area as Christians. And of course, it wasn't just in Italy, it was throughout Europe and even in the Muslim world. But the thing is, in Venice, and to a certain extent in Mantua as well, the authorities actually invited Jews to come and live there. Not in the same block, but in the ghetto. And there were so many that they had to expand the ghetto. And the scholars that I've spoken to tell me that these laws enforcing the ghetto were not always strictly enforced. Some Jews might spend overnight outside of the ghetto. Christians sometimes came into the ghetto to meet with Jews. And because because the church forbade Christians to loan money to each other and take interest, they turned to the Jews. So the Jews became the bankers. And of course, there's the trope of the Jewish moneylender that Shakespeare, of course, made famous. But there was this interaction between the two communities in that area. And it turns out in many areas as well. So we find Jews at the court of Gonzaga in Mantua as well. Rossi was the only major composer there, but there were other instrumentalists and singers. of Jewish origin that were working there. But Rossi went to work at the palace in the daytime, and at night he went back to sleep in his bedroom in the ghetto.
Now, to give us to now set up some context for this music that we're about to perform, and that Rossi, I mean, he's famous for a lot of instrumental music as well, but the choral Jewish liturgical music that we're about to hear. Can you start by just giving us that background on what it is about Rossi's music that is so revolutionary and unique for its time?
Yes. Um, it- Jewish liturgical music was by and large monophonic. It was a chant, most of which was not metrical, but free chant, kind of like Gregorian chant, and using modes that were different from the major and minor modes that were the staple of European music at the time. The leader of the service would be a cantor of some sort, although they were not called cantors back then. It might have just been an amateur person appointed to lead the service, and they knew that they would use certain modes, different mode for different day of the year, for different prayer, for different time of the year. And the mode was not just a scale, but a set of melodic motifs that would be used as building blocks. And those in the congregation would be singing along, but not what we would call unison singing or even homophonic singing. It was heterophonic singing. They were all singing kind of the same thing, but not exactly and not at the same time, because it wasn't a performance. They were just all individuals singing their prayers at the same time, more or less, and using the same modes. There were some places where they had accompanying the cantor would be one or two singers who would improvise some harmony, but nothing was written down. And by and large, the Jews, the Jews didn't know how to read music, and they didn't write music. Now, obviously, we have here an exception resulting from the slightly more liberal times of the Renaissance in Italy. And in fact, there were many Jews who read Italian and Latin classics and poetry and knew how to read music. And this was very different from what was happening in other parts of Europe at that time.
So was there a composer who for Jewish music that had ever written down a harmony before Rossi? I mean, is
Zero.
he really the first to do this?
He's the first to do it. And on the front page of the publication from 1622, it says, Chadasha ba'aretz, something new in the land.
Wow.
Right on the front page. And then in the lengthy introduction, it's mentioned many times that nothing like this had ever been done before. In fact, it was Rossi's friend, the Rabbi Leone Modena, who suggested to Rossi that he might try using this style of music to set the Jewish prayers. And there were many rabbis who were against this for many reasons. And so there's this lengthy introduction to the book written by the rabbi justifying. He says, this is what the law says, and don't misinterpret it. This is okay according to the law, and what Rossi's doing is wonderful. Don't you dare criticize it. I know better than you.
Yet some still criticized it. Many
Oh,
even.
oh boy. Yeah. I mean, you don't you don't need laws unless people are breaking the laws, right? So you don't have to justify unless people are coming out against it. But he bring in the introduction, he brings up one argument after the next and then breaks each one of them down. But there is still people today who think that there is no room in a Jewish liturgical service for that kind of music. It should just be the traditional. As well as, I must say, there are those who say, no, we should only have singing and instruments and they shouldn't have any traditional music. So, yeah.
Um, I'm curious. So he's the first composer writing polyphony, multiple voices and harmonies. Is
Mhm.
any of it based on traditional liturgical monophony and modes, or is this a wholly new sound to a Jewish synagogue?
Yeah. That's holy with a W, I assume. Um, no, it's an excellent question. And I have not been able to find any traditional Jewish music that he used. The one thing I found was he has a setting of Psalm 80, which is Elohim Ashivenu, and it was used as part of the Torah service in Italian synagogues. And the melody for that, I also found in a recorded collection of traditional Italian Jewish music, and it's almost the same melody. So this brings up the question, was this a traditional melody that Rossi used for his composition? I think it's the opposite, which happens a lot in synagogue music, and that is you have a composition that is written originally for choir, let's say, and people start singing along. And eventually they don't have the choir anymore, but people are still singing and they think it's a traditional melody.
So there was so much pushback and against this music. How much of that was because it was polyphonic versus because it didn't have any of the traditional sounds in it, that it sounded like something Catholic, something Christian?
Goyish, as the Jews would say. Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that. Look, Jews living in the diaspora made an effort to maintain their unique identity, their culture, and their religion. And the community authorities, the rabbis, were suspect of anything that seemed to be watering that down and imitating something that was non-Jewish, and especially something that was in the church, was seen as suspect, that it might lead to the disintegration of the Jewish community. Yeah.
Now, during Rossi's time, were there synagogues that allowed this music to happen within liturgical services? Was it performed? Was it offered as prayer in liturgy?
Yes. Yes. We know it was performed um, because um, there are reports of people who listened to this music. And in fact, some of whom said, "Oh, you shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be doing this," which tells us that they were doing. Obviously, there were no recordings, so we're just relying on eyewitnesses or ear witnesses who report on hearing this music. And it was sung, of course, let's keep in mind, by one singer on a part, without any instrumental accompaniment, and an all male chorus. Probably not boys. In fact, almost certainly not boys, but male sopranos, male altos on those parts. And excuse me, but these were sung, they didn't bring in ringers from the church. These were sung by Jews who knew how to read music. And some of this is not easy, as you are, I'm sure, experiencing with your choir.
I'm glad you said that. I was just about to ask that if most of the Jewish community was not able to read music, then even if a synagogue appreciated what was being written, there wasn't an opportunity, maybe. But some synagogues had 4 to 8 singers that could read the parts and provide that.
Yes,
Was that
yes.
happening in Mantua or only in Venice, or did it even spread beyond those two cities?
Uh, I think the one that I saw mentioned was in Padua, but it was that whole Venetian area where we find this renaissance of Jewish music.
Venice was always the extra liberal and progressive of all of those cities, and open to a wide range of cultures, sort of
Yes.
historically. And so
And
it's
as I mentioned, Venice was the republic, I think they were called the republic, that invited Jews. In 1492, Jews were expelled from Spain, and they were not allowed to come. Many of them had converted to Christianity to save their lives, and some of them wanted to move to Italy. And those who moved to Italy, the Venetians said, if you want to go back to being Jewish, you can do that here. Whereas in Rome, they were not welcome. So we talk about different parts of Italy. So Venice, yes, was quite modern and liberal in that respect. Yeah. Relatively speaking.
of course, of
Yeah.
course. Um, Okay, so let's dive into the music itself. I'm sure many challenges to writing this music, but one that's sort of on the face is most obvious is that Hebrew, the language, is read from right to left, but
Mhm.
music is read from left to right. How did he combine these words into a cohesive and understandable way?
Not easily, not easily. And they had to use two different printing houses, as I understand it, one for the music and one for the Hebrew. Because as you know, back then, it was each note and each letter was its own, I forget what they call it, but a piece of metal that had to be put together. And nobody had ever printed music like this before. But again, it was his rabbi friend who helped uh, do the editing. So I'm going to do a screen share now. All right, what you're seeing here is the soprano part. You can see over here in the top right the word canto, spelled in Hebrew letters. Canto, of course, the Italian word for the soprano part, cantus in Latin. And in the middle here, these letters spell out Shlosha Kolot, written a composition for three voices. Okay. Now we have the music running from left to right as it normally does. And you can see this is a soprano clef. The bottom line is middle C, and there's the flat as expected on B. This piece is really in G minor, but as was the case in those days, it would just usually one flat rather than two, and it might have a little Dorian feeling to it, so that they might use the E natural. Now these note shapes, all right, they're not the circles that we're used to, but you could easily read this notation today in terms of the music. Now, the lyrics, that's another thing. The first word of this prayer is Barechu. Now that's three syllables. Can you see my pointer over
Yes.
here? Okay. So this is where the word is placed. Now the Hebrew words read from right to left, but they have put the words in the order of the music, but they didn't break the syllables. Now, three syllables have to be read over how many notes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. I think 18 notes. Now, how do you know when to sing the ba, when to sing the re, and when to sing the chu? it was up, it was up to the singer, and since it was one singer on a part, it wouldn't be a problem. Here's the next word, et. Again, it's placed under the last note to which it is sung. So you'd start singing it here, and then you'd end up there. So your eyes have to always move. And this is the word Adonai, three notes, three syllables. Hamivorach, four syllables. It starts here and ends there, etc. I mean, that's how this works. But another interesting thing here is you notice what we normally see in music of that period, and that is there are no bar lines. The other thing, of course, I think we've already mentioned is it's not a score. They would read from part books. So this was the part book just for the sopranos. Um, but the interesting thing is here in the middle of the piece is a double bar line. What is that doing in the middle of the piece? Well, as you may know from church music, when there was a double bar line put in the middle of a piece, it meant that the choir would stop because either the cantor or the congregation had something else to do, and then they would pick it up again when they got the signal. And that's exactly what is going on here. The choir takes the role of the cantor. Now, this prayer, Baruch Hu, which is the call to prayer, beginning of many different services, is sung antiphonally, first by the cantor, and then responded by the congregation, and then the third part is another solo for the cantor. Now, there's only two sections here, and only the cantorial parts would be sung by the trio of singers. The double bar line means wait, because the congregation has something to sing at that point. I made an edition of this piece where I filled in what the congregation would actually sing. And then the choir could sing that in between the others, or you can even invite the audience to sing that along. But yeah, it's fascinating. And there are 33 pieces like this, anywhere from 3 voices to 8 voices in complexity. And some of them are quite complex.
They are indeed. It gets very expansive with voices. In our concert, we have there's multiple pieces. In fact, primarily we're doing the music that's double choir because we're as a larger ensemble, not one on a part, but with 24 singers, we're doing a lot of the double choir works, and we're voicing it in different ways. Some high choirs. And look, because some of the ranges are sort of, especially the tenors and altos, kind of overlap in ranges quite a bit.
Yes.
And so there's
of course,
a couple
because
of
the alto parts would be sung by high tenors.
Yeah. Right. And so one of the ways to add texture is on a couple of the double choir pieces, instead of a standard SATB, I did soprano, high alto, low alto bass, and soprano, high tenor, low tenor bass, just so there's a weightier choir 2 and a lighter choir 1 is just a way to have more variety of texture. And we just sort of throughout played with different ideas. That Baruch Hu that you just showed us is going to be on our concert, and we are going to sing the first half of that with just solo voices, so it can be heard that way. And then the full choir
often
does the second half of that piece.
You're also doing, I saw a piece for double chorus, Eftach Na Sifatai, I believe.
Yes.
Which is for 3-part chorus and 4-part chorus, SAB and then SATB. And I found that the alto part there is if you're using women singers, I always have 1 or 2 tenors join the altos just in the high part of their range, because otherwise, that part gets lost. It's also a very interesting piece. Of course, you have the juxtaposition of choir 1, then choir 2, and then the 2 choirs together, and then choir 2, then 2 choirs together, going back and forth. But it's the only piece in the collection of 33 motets that has a refrain.
Yes. And yes, and the way that refrain comes back, it's often full choir, but not always. And what Rossi did to also just himself to provide a great variety of textures within the music was profound and
so he's in this cusp between the end of the Renaissance and the beginning of the Baroque period. And we can see influences of both, especially in this music. Definitely a very strong bass line, which is indicative of the Baroque period. The kind of polyphony, I mean, you mentioned Palestrina, comparison to Palestrina. That kind of point of imitation polyphony you see occasionally in Rossi, but not that much. But yes, he gives you lots of different textures. Quite often, you're also doing Psalm 121, and he'll do that. That's for five voices. And sometimes he'll have all five voices or different combinations of three, or this four, or that four. It's really gorgeous. Yeah.
I don't know if I have a question here, though you may have a comment to add to this. But another a unique challenge for the choir is we sing so much Latin, and in Latin, final syllables are always unaccented, always.
Mhm.
And in the Hebrew, most of the final syllables are actually where the accent goes and sort of driving into the final note. That's just has taken additional effort for us to sort of fight against some of our natural tendencies to try to unaccent the final note. Um,
Mhm. I mean, if you go with the sense of the music and the sense of the phrase, it'll indicate. Yeah.
Well, and in some ways that we've actually, as we've gotten used to it, I might almost argue that it's easier. When I'm working with Latin with the choir, it's actually a constant point in rehearsal of to stop
Hmm.
accenting the final note that
Yeah.
feels like an accented downbeat. So actually, the Hebrew has allowed us to go back to some of our natural tendencies that we have to fight against in the Latin. Is another way to look at that as well. And,
Interesting.
and you brought up the no bar lines in the music at the time.
Hmm. Hmm.
The modern bar line tells us where accents go.
Right.
Um, and the editions we sing have bar lines because we have to sort of do that for modern readers. But there's been a couple of places where I've had to rebar the
Yes.
music, or I'm not conducting it to the bars. I'm conducting it to the accents of the words because
Yes.
the natural bar lines fight against the way the music was written.
I even, for some of the editions of Rossi's music that I've made, I published modern part books. So you'd have just the alto part, no bar lines, but with the transliterated lyrics, so that all could do it. And, obviously the conductor can't do it from that. But many of my singers said they really enjoyed singing from a part book. And then you're not constrained by the bar line. And as you just mentioned, the bar line might work for the soprano part, but not work for the tenor part. Right.
I need to get my hands on these. So that that topic was exactly my doctoral dissertation research. I made modernized part books of Latin music,
Hmm.
and without bar lines, but modernized the notes so they were quite readable to the modern reader,
Hmm.
but no bar lines and only their own parts. And my singers, there was mixed reaction because there is a level of stress in trying to read it in a new way. But
Hmm.
once the singers got used to it, many of them found that it helped reveal the music in a new way. And they were no longer fighting against something that was unnatural to the music in the way it was originally written. I
Well
didn't
put.
know that you had done the same thing with the Hebrew music. I will
Yes.
take a look at those. That's wonderful. Uh, so if Rossi is the first to do this. Can you speak to the impact it had on liturgical Jewish music going forward? Where do we see his impact?
Very little.
Mm.
We don't know exactly when he died. It might have been 1630. The Austrians invaded from the north, I think in 1627, and there was a plague, and a lot of people died or moved away. His friend, Rabbi Modena, um, in Venice around 1630 or a little bit later, he had a society for Jewish music of singers, and he actually composed some music himself. And we know that they did performances there, liturgical performances, and yet there's no mention of Salomone Rossi. So we assume that he must have died by then. And that little final swan song of Modena's music seems to be the end. Now we see here and there in Casale Monferrato in Italy, there was a synagogue where they had music, both choral and instrumental music. In Prague, there was also a tradition. In Amsterdam, here and there, we see um, instances of one or two pieces of music. Were they aware of Rossi? Were they following in his footsteps, or just it sprung independently in each of these places? I think probably the latter. Um, there was a cantor, uh, I think it was 18th century, who came across one of the part books of Rossi's music, and he really didn't know what to do with it. It wasn't until the 19th century that cantor uh, Naumburg, Samuel Naumburg in Paris, got himself a hold of all 8 part books, and he tried to transcribe it. He was having trouble. He relied on a young student at the conservatory by the name of Vincent Dandy, who helped him with the transcription. And he made the first modern transcription edition of Rossi's music. And he did some of them in his synagogue. This is mid-19th century Paris. And then since then, numerous editions using the additional practices of the time. Naumburg felt free to change the text and change the key and add dynamics, etc. It's okay, and and that's been going on until the present time, modernizing these editions. I mean, ironically, modernizing to go back to be faithful to the old. Yeah.
Modern understanding of performance practice and
Yes.
Renaissance editing and such.
And this reached its peak in the musicologist Don Haran. Don, who was actually born in Cambridge, Massachusetts, who lived many years in Israel, he passed away, I think, about 10 years ago. He was the ultimate scholar on Rossi's music, and he made scholarly editions of all of Rossi's music, including the secular madrigals, etc., and the instrumental music. You know, keep in mind that Rossi was the first composer to publish a trio sonata. Rossi was the first composer to publish uh, madrigals with basso continuo accompaniment before Monteverdi. Yes, before Mon and the poets that he used for his madrigals were all the latest, the most avant-garde poets at the time. So he was really an innovator, not just in terms of what he did for the synagogue music, but in many ways.
That actually sets up my next question really well. I On our concert, it was important to me to not just present Rossi's music, but to give it some context. And so we have a couple of psalms of Monteverdi and a psalm also by Palestrina.
Yeah.
Can you? And it seems to me, if I had to place him, it's sort of right in between Palestrina. He's sort of the bridge between Palestrina and Monteverdi. How would you contextualize him and his musical style with Palestrina and Monteverdi?
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, he's on that cusp between the end of the Renaissance and the beginning of the Baroque era. We don't, as I said, we don't see a lot of that point of imitation polyphony in Rossi's music that you do in Palestrina. There are notably some exceptions to that, though. And Monteverdi is, I mean, his liturgical music is very instrumental as well as vocal, and Rossi's is vocal. Rossi's is meant to be performed in a relatively small building. These synagogues were relatively small. I don't know if you've seen the beautiful synagogues of Venice. You can Google those. They're just gorgeous. The synagogues from Rossi's time, but they were small places. And Monteverdi, by the way, who was for a number of years in Mantua at the same time as Rossi, right? They were roommates in the Gonzaga court, both writing music for the Gonzagas. And then Monteverdi, of course, gets the job at San Marco in Venice, and so he's writing this magnificent, the Vespers of 1610, this magnificent music for the choir and the instruments meant to be sounding, reverberating around the walls there. And of course, Monteverdi's working on a great tradition of music written in that style, the Gabriellis, Gastoldi, etc. So, and Monteverdi is, taking these baby steps, as it were, but a very precocious baby.
Um, so then, in addition to Palestrina, Monteverdi, and Rossi, I also wanted to present some more contemporary Jewish music. And one of the significant composers of whose Psalm 150 we're doing is Louis Lewandowski. What can you tell us about him and his importance in Jewish music?
Um, don't get me started because he's another composer that I love and love to spend a lot of time with. Lewandowski um, was born in what is now Poland. At that time, it was the eastern provinces of Germany, or Prussia, as it was known then. And he comes as an orphan. He goes to Berlin, and he gets a job uh, as a choir boy with the cantor at the synagogue there. And when I say choir boy, this was the kind of choir that I mentioned earlier. It was all improvised, or they would work it out and they would memorize what they were doing. And they would, do a drone or a simple harmony or repeat the phrase of the cantor. And so he's doing that. Um, and apparently he was very talented. And at some point he comes to the attention of one of the members of the synagogue by the name of Alexander Mendelssohn, a cousin of the composer Felix, who uses his protectia to get Lewandowski admitted to the conservatory in Berlin, the Sing Academy in Berlin. Lewandowski is the first Jew ever to be admitted to that institution. And he does really well. He's studying composition and keyboard. Um, and then the Jewish community of Berlin, having heard the music of another composer, Solomon Zulzer in Vienna, who was writing already four-part music for the synagogue, like what Rossi had done they were saying, why can't we have that here in Berlin? So the cantor Asher Leon ordered the music, uh, and he's trying to read it, and he couldn't read the music. He's an old-fashioned cantor. But guess who could? It was Louis Lewandowski could read it. So Louis became the choir director, and eventually, 6 years later, I think he was 17 at the time. By the time he was 23, he's choir master for all the synagogues in Berlin. And as such, he's the first choir master in the history of the synagogue that is not also a cantor. He's not the organist, he's not the cantor, he's the choir man, the Kapellmeister and composer. And he writes this wonderful, wonderful music in the style of Mendelssohn, I would say. Um, the piece you're doing is his most famous piece, the setting of the Psalm 150, the Hallelujah, which is one of the first choral pieces that attracted me to this repertoire. And I want to be a choir conductor. That was the piece. It can become a little trite and hackneyed, but it's fun. It's a fun piece. And
I
it's
will
clearly
say
joyous. Yeah.
it's so full of joy. It's just a 5 minute trumpet fanfare of joy
Mhm.
throughout, and there's no doubt that as I look up and see the faces of my singers as we're rehearsing it, there's a smile in every face because it is just filled with exuberance. It's a great delight.
Did you see my
Absolutely.
virtual choir performance of that?
Yes, I
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
That was a really special thing. And that also helped me understand. Like I read somewhere that this Psalm 150 was one of his most famous and oft performed compositions, but
Mhm.
but not being in the community, it's not a piece I'd really come across until I was preparing for this concert and was researching what I needed to add to this program.
Mhm.
And then to see your virtual choir helped me understand, oh, Jewish folks everywhere know this piece and love this piece, and that was a meaningful thing for me to see a wide range of people joining you on that for that project. That was really neat.
Enthusiastically.
Yes, indeed. I want to wrap up with this question. For my audience, do you have advice, insights to offer for their listening experience? What ought they to be listening for? How can they, what would you advise them for them to be able to experience this concert most meaningfully, most profoundly, most interestingly? What should they be listening for?
Well, I mean, one thing, as you mentioned, is contextualizing it. And I suppose if your audience members who watch this video, they'll have some background on it. Another thing, this is very simple, that I do in my concerts now whenever I can, and that is to use super titles so that there is a translation going, and people can understand the words. And Rossi can be very expressive of words. The word shir that begins his setting of Psalm 121, which means song. It's the one extended melisma in the piece. Just like his very sad setting of Psalm 137 by the rivers of Babylon, Al Nahar od Babel. He starts with depicting a river, especially in the bass part. And then there's one very jarring harmony that comes on the word we wept. And again, so if the audience knows that, and of course that would be any piece that's not sung in English, and sometimes even pieces that are sung in English, we don't even think about the music expressing the words. But Rossi, I think Rossi's music appeals to anybody who loves great music. I would play this music for my students at Northeastern, and I would say, "Does this sound Jewish?" And these are not Jewish kids, so they had no idea that the lyrics were Hebrew. So there's nothing about this music that bespeaks Jewish other than the lyrics, or other than knowing the original setting of it, which was intended for synagogue performance. So people can just enjoy it. And I love that you're doing it in conjunction with Rossi's contemporaries. I have a problem when people, the only time they hear Jewish choral music is oh, we'll do a special concert of Jewish music, or here's a Christmas concert, we'll throw in something Jewish, or let's do ethnic musics. No, you're doing Monteverdi, do a Rossi. It fits.
Absolutely. He belongs in any concert of Baroque music, of Renaissance music.
Yeah.
He's every bit one of those composers that ought to be programmed regularly and not just for special occasions.
Yeah. And check out the madrigals, by the way. There's some beautiful, beautiful some of two-part and three-part canzonets, as well as the five-part standard madrigal. Beautiful.
It's been really special to prepare for this program. I mean, we just talked about that Rossi could belong on any program, which is absolutely true. But it's also been a special thing to dive deeply. 2/3 of the pieces we're doing on this program, or certainly over half of the pieces, are by Solomon Rossi, and to be able to sing that many of the pieces just have given us deeper insight, given us and to be able to sing that much Hebrew, that now my singers are getting through it very quickly, and it's becoming easier rather than the one-off. We're getting to sort of live in that language for several weeks now. And that's made it, I think, more fluent, as best we can for all of us to get to spend time in that and to get to compare the differences. You mentioned the Shir Lamolat that has that initial melismatic descent. That's so beautiful. It might be my favorite piece on the program, all because of that first bar, all because of that opening beautiful gesture. But we wouldn't know that was unique if we weren't also doing some of his other pieces that don't have that. And so to get to be able to do a big variety. This is a funny and almost embarrassing story, but Rossi had been on my mind for almost a decade. And because I understood the title of his big publication to be the Songs of Solomon,
Mhm.
I thought it was from Songs of Song. I thought it was all scriptures from the Songs of Song. I didn't realize, oh, now it's actually mostly Psalms and then some prayers and hymns. And that was just my ignorance based on his title that turns out to be kind of be a joke, that it's the songs of, I don't know if joke's the right word, but that it's his songs, the songs of
A
Solomon
play on
Rossi.
words, play on it, because his name is Salomone, so it's the songs of Salomone. Uh, in Hebrew, it's Hashirim Asher Li Shlomo. Shlomo is the original of Solomon. But many Jewish authors would do this. They would use a play on their name and connect it with something biblical. And especially for Rossi, because he had to ground it in something because it was so controversial. So again, whether it was his idea or his rabbi friend idea to do it that way, that was definitely on purpose to connect it to the name of a biblical book.
Dr. Jacobson, we have had such a great time preparing this music, diving into this. I've been reading your research on this, using your transliterations and international phonetic alphabet to help us get the pronunciation down. And those are all resources that you've provided that's made it possible for composers around the world to be able to perform this music. And so to have you here and have this conversation with me today is very meaningful. And I know it's going to be give a lot of insights to our audiences as well. So thank you so very much for joining us today.
My pleasure. One of my favorite subjects to talk about.